It's now my pleasure to introduce someone who's not from UNE and a rural science graduate. It's my pleasure to welcome Sarah Blumer to the stand. Sarah's from Murdoch University, and she did quite a lot of work in the maternal area in her PhD studies. I won't go into the detail of that, but based on that, very well qualified to continue the theme around maternal efficiency. So welcome to the stage, Sarah. It's all yours.
Thanks, Richard. So first of all, I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me to get up and have a chat today. It's a really great experience to be able to get up and speak in front of a group of leading breeders and a very illustrious crowd here today. So I'm going to be talking today about maternal efficiency, which is a really massive topic. And I'd just like to acknowledge straight up front that there are plenty of leading breeders out here who are a long way down the track thinking about these sort of things. And so if I'm talking about some stuff that you're already familiar with, then please excuse me. So like I said, it's a really massive topic. I've had a bit of a whinge to a few people over the last couple of weeks, and I've bounced some ideas off a few colleagues, so I'd just like to acknowledge those people. And probably I'll start with a bit of maternal efficiency, and then I'll just sort of poodle off on a tangent that maybe I'm a little bit more familiar with, and talk about some work that we've been doing over in Western Australia, looking at some slightly different efficiency traits than those have been discussed today. So here's a really basic definition of maternal efficiency that we're probably all pretty across today. And been some great discussion already this morning about selecting for reproductive traits, and we've heard some really exciting news about those new breeding values for reproduction, which is terrific. But essentially, a really basic definition is kilograms of lamb per kilograms of ewe. And for those of you who haven't seen it for a while, that's green up on the left-hand side there. So ideally, we'd like a ewe that's going to wean her own weight in lamb. That'd be pretty terrific. That would be an ideal ewe for me. And I think along the lines of our discussion today and yesterday, we're quite a long way down that track. We've got a range of breeding values we can use to get that ewe weaning more kilograms of ewe for her own live weight. And we can certainly have a really good crack at those ewes that are weaning their own live weight. And we've got a range of breeding values that we can use to select for those. So we can look at the total weight of that adult ewe during her life. So we're probably going to have a bit of pressure selecting for weight. So we'd like something that will reproduce as a ewe lamb, because that's a pretty good indicator of lifetime productivity. And we've heard that from some speakers this morning as well. We can put some selection pressure on number of lambs weaned. Ideally, we'd like that ewe to be doing twins, because then she's got the maximum opportunity to give us that weight of lamb weaned per ewe. But we can drive that a bit harder, and as we saw from Linton, we've got some terrific triplet producers that can get a great weight of lamb weaned as well. And we're going to put some selection pressure on weaning weight so we can get those lambs that grow fast and thrive, and we can get them off the property as quickly as possible. As has also been raised a bit in the last couple of days, if we put pressure on these traits to improve the weight of lamb weaned per kilogram of ewe, we are going to start driving our mature size up. And there are certainly breeders out in the audience today and out in the industry who are looking at bending that growth curve. So they're going to put some upwards pressure on weaning weight, post-weaning traits, and a bit of downward pressure on adult weights, and try to reduce the mature size that way. And certainly there are a couple of different ways we can go about that. So we are looking at a bigger mature size when we're driving reproductive rates. But some of the other things that interest me are, what about the variable costs that have gone into getting that ewe and lamb unit to the point where they're producing that weight of lamb per kilo of ewe weaned? It's not just about that one variable. There's a lot that goes into getting that unit to the point where she's weaning that lamb. So we need to be thinking about mature size. Are we driving that too hard? We need to be thinking about how much that animal is eating. If we can only run a few of them per hectare because they're really, really big, they might be weaning lots of lamb, but is that necessarily efficient? Maybe it's better to run something a little bit lighter and run a few more of them. And what about the way that those ewes are converting the feed energy that you provide to them? How about the way that they are converting that into their own live weight and into the live weight of their lambs? So feed efficiency. Turn. Beautiful. So in a set stocking scenario, there are quite a few ways that we can look at improving maternal efficiency on our farm, in looking at ways that we can reduce the costs of running those ewes on our property. So rather than having maybe a Formula One ewe that requires all the inputs and a really perfect road to make sure that she produces at her absolute maximum, we want to look at optimising that maternal efficiency. So what are some of the ways we can reduce the management costs and maybe the burden on us as well? And a lot of your ram buyers might be trying to integrate with a number of other enterprises, so we want to make their life as easy as possible. And so particularly if we think about our merinos right at the top, one of the ways we can look at doing that is to reduce fly strike. And we've got some breeding values available that we can use to help us reduce fly strike in our flocks and make those ewes a little bit more efficient, because they don't require quite so much input, they don't require quite so much management intervention, and maybe we use a little bit less labour. We can also be looking at increasing the resilience and resistance to worms. We've got a fantastic breeding value for that. Again, we can reduce some of the chemical inputs and some of the labour inputs, and that will go towards increasing the overall efficiency of our maternal flock. And the area that I'm particularly interested in is looking at whole body energy, how that ewe stores the feed energy that you provide to her and how she uses it during the course of a year, and how that can help us to maybe improve her robustness over summer. So if there's a bit of a tough period, she can sail through it because she's got some stores on board, and also how the role of fat might affect her maintenance efficiency. So how much feed energy you have to put into her to maintain her throughout the course of the year. So this is probably a bit more what it's looking like out in the field at the moment. And it's not just about the kilos of lamb that this ewe is going to produce. We need a ewe that's going to survive to reproduce. So she needs to survive as a lamb, she needs to survive as a weaner. Hopefully we want her to produce a lamb as a lamb, and then we want her to go on and be productive as a hogget and as an adult, and well into her adult years. Obviously she's got to be producing lambs. She is the engine of our meat and wool industries. She needs to be mobilising her tissue, catabolising that tissue to support those lambs during pregnancy to help it grow, and in lactation to keep it growing through to weaning weight. And we want her to recover that condition that she's used, preferably when feed is cheap. So on spring feed, at the same time as you're growing that lamb, we want her to be regaining that condition, and post-lactation as well. We then want her to be efficient when we're feeding her through the dry times. We don't want to be pulling off skinny ewes and looking after them and giving them supplementary feeding. We want her to sail through that summer, and then we want her to rock up at joining, ready to go in lamb with twins again. So these are ewes that return to joining in better condition. And we might have called them good doers. And probably 20 years ago, we might have written that ewe off because we might have gone, oh, well, she's just killed her lambs last year and she's put it all into herself. But now we know that there are ewes that are perfectly capable of raising a set of twins, recovering condition, remaining efficient over summer, and then lining up to have another go. And we saw some evidence of that in Linton's presentation, that beautiful ewe that's just backed up with twins every year. So how is it that they're going through this same period and we've got great variation in how these ewes respond over that period? Are they ewes that are just eating more? Maybe they can just physically stuff more into the system. Or maybe they're expending a little bit less energy. Is it something about their basal metabolic rate? So do they just need less energy to just go about the business of being? Maybe they're a little bit less responsive to stress. If a tree falls on the far side of the paddock, do they leap to their feet and have a panic, or do they just have a quick look and keep on ruminating? And maybe it's a bit about maintaining fat tissue rather than lean tissue, because there's a cost to maintaining lean tissue, and when we have fat in the system, it actually costs a little bit less as a proportion of body weight to maintain that tissue. Oops, too far. So in terms of fat tissue and the value to maintenance, I've got a few slides now that I probably need to spend a bit of time explaining. So this is residual feed intake. So this is a group of animals that we had in an animal house feeding a diet that was essentially the equivalent of cardboard. It was a very poor quality barley chaff, and we wanted to know how these ewes would perform on this poor quality diet. So we know that approximately what a ewe of a certain live weight requires. So for example, a ewe that's 50 kilos requires 6.7 megajoules of energy per day to maintain live weight. Obviously there's variation around that, and there's been lots of talk about variation today, so we've got some variation around that as well. And so this ewe up here, she requires half a megajoule more to maintain her live weight than a ewe that's sitting on the zero line here. Down here on the x-axis, I've got leptin. And leptin is a hormone that's very highly correlated with whole body energy. And it's a reproductive hormone that signals when an animal needs to get more reproductive stores in. So when your leptin levels are low, there's a drive to go out and eat and get more energy so you can build up your storage levels. So we measured leptin and we looked at feed efficiency. Happily, leptin is quite nicely associated with condition score, so I can just whack condition score down on that axis to make it a bit more familiar. And condition score was also associated with feed intake. So across the range of our ewes, on a daily basis, the most efficient ewe was eating 2 megajoules less per day than the least efficient ewe. And obviously we can't look at those extremes, but if we have a look at the top quartile and the bottom quartile, we've got a range of about half a condition score, and the range in intake for those ewes to maintain live weight was 0.8 of a megajoule. So the ewes in the top 25% of our group were eating 0.8 of a megajoule less than the least efficient ewes. So that's quite a handy saving if you apply that to a 3-month summer period or drought feeding. So the flip side of this trait is residual live weight change. So if we feed animals at the same level, at the same live weight, there's variation in how much the live weight change fluctuates. So some of those ewes, if you give them a given level of feed, some of them will gain more live weight and some of them might be losing live weight. And this is also associated with our hormone leptin, whole body energy. I can throw in my condition score overlay there, and for our top quartile and our bottom quartile, those ewes were gaining 30 grams more. So at maintenance, if we are feeding our ewes a maintenance diet, then if we've got a bit more fat in the system, those ewes were able to gain 30 grams a day. And some of these ewes were experiencing live weight loss. So we've got a reduction in live weight loss, which is a terrific trait to have over, particularly through drought periods and over summer. So fat in storage has a much higher energy content than lean, and we know that fat is really important for reproductive animals. The biological unit won't reproduce unless it's got some energy stores on board to spend, otherwise it's just trying to survive. So when we gain lean tissue weight, the bulk of that weight is actually in water. Whereas when we're gaining fat tissue, that is in triglycerides and it's just energy that is then available to that animal. And so you can see there the range in the values. So a kilo of lean on our animal, if she has to call on that kilo of lean to support her through a tough time, that kilo is worth just over 5 megajoules per kilo. Whereas fat is right up at 36 megajoules. So it's a really energy-rich source of storage. And when we look at energy storage, it's much more valuable to have it ready to go than it is to be trying to put it in feed. So 1 kilo on board is worth 1.5 of feed energy that you have to deliver in a supplement. And that's because of the activity during eating. Obviously there's a cost to eating, chewing, walking around the paddock. And there's also the heat increment, the cost to that animal of actually digesting it and storing that energy. So if we're sending our ewes into a period of drought, or we're asking her to go over summer, so that's a pretty standard scene in Western Australia, that's a 6-month drought every year. If she's got the energy on board ready to go, it's more efficient than trying to get that energy back into her later on. Press the button. So now we're starting to look at whole body energy rather than just live weight, because live weight is made up of fat and of lean, and the fat component in our adult ewes starts to become much more important. So now, rather than just looking at live weight, we're looking at whole body energy. And so this is some work we did where we CT'd some adult ewes. And the Merino ewes had come from two quite specific genotypes. So one of the genotypes was using breeding values and was placing selection pressure on the things that worked for them in their system. And in that system, it was clean fleece weight. And they were in the top 15% for clean fleece weight. In the green was a stud that was placing more emphasis on reproduction, and so they'd been really pushing on their carcass traits. And those ewes were in the top 15% for fat and muscling in the Merino Select database. So these ewes were delivered to me in beautiful condition. They'd been beautifully prepared. All the ewes were average about 3.2 condition score. They were a pretty similar weight when they all rocked up. And I thought, this is going to be absolutely smashing. We'll see a beautiful difference based on the work that I've done before. It'll be exciting. Intake, live weight change, fantastic. So we CT scanned these animals, and then I used the CTs to tell me exactly how much body energy that ewe had. So remembering that a kilo of fat is worth 35 megajoules and a kilo of lean is worth 5 megajoules. And so that's what we've got on this axis here. So the ewes were the same weight at the start. They were the same weight when they came out at the other end. They'd eaten the same amount of food, and I was actually quite disappointed because I was looking for something really exciting. But when I went into the CT data, these high clean fleece weight ewes had actually managed to go backwards. So despite the fact that they had gained weight at the same rate, they'd actually taken tissue out of their fat stores and used it to support lean tissue growth. And that meant on a whole animal, whole energy basis, had actually gone slightly backwards. Whereas these repro ewes had tucked it away and stored it into fat stores, and so had actually increased the amount of energy storage that they had available. So in terms of whole body energy, fat tissue has great storage value, and it's really important for our adult ewes. When we look at ewes that are maintaining live weight, adult ewes that are maintaining live weight, they are actually losing lean tissue and putting it into fat stores. So we see a ewe that's maintaining live weight, and she's actually changing her system, getting ready for periods of drought. Ideally, we really want our ewes to be gaining that energy when it's cheap. So we want to be doing it at the same time as we're growing lambs on cheap feed out there on pasture. So she really needs to be regaining those stores during lactation. We can look at reducing variable costs, and whole body energy has a part in here as well. So if we have a ewe that has a bit more storage, maybe we can just let her slide over summer a little bit. We can reduce our supplementary feeding costs, and we can reduce a bit of labour as well. But what we'd really like to be able to do is to increase the stocking rate, because that's our profit driver. So I have been speaking quite slowly, so I'd better pick up. This is from the Merino Lifetime Productivity data, and this is industry sires that are joined to base ewes at a number of sites across Australia. And this is data from the 2016 drop of wethers from that project. And down the side here, we've got a number of sires that we've just labelled with numbers, and we've looked at the value per head. So we've got a nice range there. This is two wool clips and the value of that carcass in the market. So the range is from $230 up there down to $272. So we've got a really big range in value per head. So I'm just going to pull out a few standouts here. So this chap here, his wether progeny, we're making $271 a head. Okay, and so that makes him, he looks pretty good in comparison to the other sheep. He's about 7% more profitable. So that's pretty handy. But then if we go across and we look at his live weight, he's a fairly moderate frame size, so we can run quite a lot of him in comparison to some of these other sheep. Number 8 down here, that's 70 kilos, we have to run a few less of him. If we bring condition score into that, we can see that this bloke is running at 2.4. So it's quite low. He might need a bit of additional support to get him through the summer. And when we take that into account and we look at standard reference weight, which is the weight of an animal at condition score 3, that allows us to make a fairer comparison of those sires. So he was a pretty handy sire, his progeny were pretty profitable, and look, even when we take his condition score into account, he's still a little bit more profitable than some of the other ones, so we can probably work with that. I'm just going to jump straight down to these two because it's quite an interesting comparison. They're about the same per head. 2 kilos difference for live weight there. But when we get to condition score, there's a whole condition scores difference between them. And when we get that out, so we're looking at standard reference weight, we're thinking about how many of those animals we can run per hectare, how much support are they going to need through the tough times, then the difference out the other end becomes quite considerable. Thank you. I'm nearly there. So, got some new tasks, which is fantastic. In the work that we've just done now, we've got these wethers in a feed intake trial at the moment. They've just had their second DEXA scan to look at whole body composition, so I'm pretty excited about that. What I'm seeing is some sire differences in the relationship between condition score and whole body fatness. So animals that are running at maybe 21% whole body fat, some of those sire groups might have an average condition score of 2.8 and some of them might have an average condition score of 3.3. So that says something about the animals depositing that fat into different storage depots, and that will probably have an effect on how well they mobilise that fat and how well they store it as well. So there's a bit of work to do there. And obviously, as with everything, we have to make sure it translates to the paddock. So we'll be collecting a whole lot of phenotypic data and then we'll be handballing it to the crew at Sheep Genetics and hoping that we can get some useful traits out of it that we can rock out into the paddock. So income and costs per hectare are the drivers of livestock profitability. It's all about being able to maximise stocking rate and improve your return per hectare. Selecting on value per head traits such as live weight or clean fleece weight or the weight of lamb weaned are likely to compromise your per hectare profit due to the negative effects on efficiency and resilience traits. And I think that's been really well described. We have to steer away from single trait selection and make sure that we're looking at a raft of traits that will help us develop our enterprise. Happily for me, there's lots of work still to be done, so got some exciting times ahead. But pretty much there's a whole raft of things that go into maternal efficiency. It's not just about that lamb that she's producing, it's about how much it costs you to get that lamb on the ground and off the farm. And a lot of that is not necessarily just about the conception, about the ewe growth and about the live lambs, because there's a huge amount of work going in those areas. Lots of exciting lamb survival stuff. We're pretty familiar with growth, but it's maybe more about some of these traits that look at the way she mobilises and uses the energy stores that she has available and how she goes about restoring those energy stores when it's available. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Some really interesting and challenging things there around whole body metabolism type issues and energy storage, which stretches a lot of us out of our day-to-day comfort zones, no doubt. So let's just time for a couple of quick ones, Sarah. Do we have enough records to investigate genetic variation in whole body energy?
So we do not have enough records to investigate genetic variation in whole body energy. We hope that we will get some indicators of that in the current work that we are doing with the Merino Lifetime Productivity flock, because we'll have the sires so we can look at some sire variation. And we hope that that will give us enough information to say, yes, this is a valuable trait and it has economic imperative, and then we will be able to roll it out and measure it more. So as part of this experiment, we're looking at a whole raft of proxies for whole body energy, because obviously putting lots of sheep through a DEXA machine is not particularly practical when you're looking at live adults. It's okay if you're killing them now, I think, but putting them through our machine is quite time consuming. So we're doing things like making sure that the relationship between leptin and the DEXA machine results are comparable and maybe useful, and we're looking at a raft of other traits that we hope will correlate enough with whole body energy that we can roll out and measure much larger numbers of animals.
So I think you've really started to roll into that second question there, Sarah, around leptin testing or alternate things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe expand just a little more.
Leptin is not the perfect sum either. So we see some sire variation with leptin, and it's a hormone that does vary throughout the year as well. And it will be quite interesting. We're using these wethers as proxies for their sisters who are still out doing the hard yards in the paddock. So it will be really interesting to look at the relationships for leptin in the males compared to the females. So leptin is not a golden bullet. I really like it, but it's also quite affordable. It's about $13 to analyse the sample, so we can churn quite a lot of them out.
Okay, thank you. And we'll just have one more of that top question, Sarah, about how we see producers actually starting to use this information in an applied commercial manner.
For sure. So I hope I've managed to communicate that this is a really important trait for our adult ewes. It's obviously fatness is not something that we want to be breeding for in our grower systems. So it's very much about what phenotypic data we can collect now to look at the variation, to see that there is room to select, and then to be able to talk with the crew at Sheep Genetics and see if there's something that's worthwhile, whether we've got some heritability and whether it will be useful to deliver that to our producers. I guess in terms of how I see it being used, I would see it as a tool for increasing stocking rate. So being able to look at our property, we do tend to manage through a pasture bottleneck, and I think the way to really drive profitability is to optimise our stocking rates per hectare. So I see it as a tool to develop some robustness through those periods that we find pretty trying.
Excellent. Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to bring that to a close, and you could join me in thanking Sarah for that thought-provoking presentation. Thank you very much.